Greetings. Here's a quick walkthrough along with some tips for Lab 1 NCIS 2800. Notice I have my WAMP server running and I'm at localhost. Let me go ahead and go in under, I've created a directory in my www folder called Labs. Now, first notice that Bubba has done an external CSS. I'm not asking you to do this for the lab. The lab directions clearly say to do an internal CSS for our formatting, and that's perfectly what's expected. But if someone wants to try an external CSS, I know we have a few folks that have had some experience there. Please feel free to do so. So let me show you the results of the lab, and this is a dynamically created table using PHP. Follows the parameters of converting Fahrenheit to Celsius. It uses um, one mathematical conversion over and over and over again, and it follows the parameters in the lab. We have 0 degrees Celsius and below is blue, and notice there's negative. We also have the signs as well, and then we have some change into green accordingly, and then once we hit super hot temperatures as indicated in the lab, we turn to red. It's one really big long dynamic table. It is not coded by each one of these rows is not coded by hand. It's dynamically generated by PHP. Your table does not have to look exactly the same as this one, nor do the color schemes. This is just the CSS that I used, and of course there's plenty of documentation involved here as well, and I'm not going to show you the code to this one at this point. What I would like to show you is I have a tip for you between static and dynamic table, and we've talked about this in class, but I want to show it. Here we have a static table 1, 2, 3, 4. Fair enough, we've coded that by hand. And the dynamic table, which is what we really use a lot of PHP coding for, to expand or contract tables according to parameters, we have a dynamic table here. Now I'm going to show you the code for this, and we'll talk about the code as well in class. So here's our Lab1 tip PHP file, and so some of the stuff we are very familiar with, our doc types, our HTML. Notice there's no PHP here, okay? Um, we do have a static table as well as dynamic table built here, okay? Um, and the way to look at this then, here, I'm sorry to increase my static table here, is here's our static table. We have our table tag. I have a class set for table format that done in the CSS. We have our table row and then table data areas. So this is where we get our 1, 2, 3, 4 on the table. That's really easy when we just have a few items to do here. However, look at this small piece of PHP code that generates a table that runs from 1 to 64 with some color coding. And if you look very briefly, you'll notice that even numbers are red. Odd numbers have no color coding. So there might be a time, of course, when you want that, correct? So look at this dynamic table, and we'll talk more about this. And there's an example in the book as well too. I have 3 variables: int total table width, int total table height, and int count. Right? So I've named those Hungarian so that they're integer. I have 8, 8, and 1, and I've used a for loop to create this. Right? So I've used for int height equals 0, int height is less than int total table height, int height plus plus, right? So we have a counter here. We have our for loop. I print my first table row, and then embedded within this for loop, we have a nested loop, and that's with our int width 0, int width total table width. So we do our height and our width. We're building this table dynamically. So I will talk about this in more detail in class, but this is how I've built a table, an 8 by 8, right, table with numbers in it. And how have I done the numbers? Well, the numbers actually are a simple if-else, right? If int count mod 2, right? Now our mod 2, if we do mod 2 and there's nothing left, that makes it what? Right? All even numbers. Mod 2, well, there'll be no remainder, right? Else we go ahead and give it an int count plus plus, okay? So that's how we go ahead and we can determine um, the um, uh, number that will happen here. Now, there's some other things going on here. If int count mod 2 is equal to 0, we have a class we've created called ColorIt in our CSS, and we make it a certain color. Else, we have a class with no coloration, right? So it's not an even number, and our class ColorIt handles that up top. So here we have this inline style. We have our table format, and we have ColorIt, and each one of these, we have an H2 as well too, all have different styles, right? So we have this internal style where I have a table format, I have a color I used for green for my H2, ColorIt's red, and sure enough, if we look at the results, my H2s are green, and my ColorIts, which are even numbers, if we scroll all the way down here, um, are red. Okay, and so I've done that with mod 2. So take a look over this once again, this code here. Very useful to know whether or not if we should color something. That's it. Like I said, we'll talk about this as well in class, but this is a nice review as you work on the lab.